Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where it's apparently still Christmas. Roger, why haven't you taken the Christmas lights down? Jeez. What do you do all day, Roger? Anyway, we're just keeping the holiday spirit up all year long, apparently, here at stately Vaughan Manor. But actually, Roger and I have returned because it's time for the Book of the Week. The Book of the Week, that spellbinding show where I talk about just some random book that I think is cool. And the random book that I think is cool today is this tattered old thing. This is a science fiction Argosy edited by Damon Knight. And this was published way back in 1972 when I was only 1 year old. And I didn't read this when it came out because I was a toddler, but it's a great book published in 1972. An anthology of 24 of the best stories and 2 full-length novels. This is a big, fat anthology. This guy is 828 pages long. My copy is very tattered because this copy used to belong to the Boston Public Library. I don't know how it ended up here, but it ended up here. But it has obviously been read by probably hundreds of people quite happily, I'm sure. And this is a very library-looking edition. It's got the library marks on the side. Apparently, the Boston Public Library had little stickers to let you know the books were science fiction. Did they have little stickers for all the genres? I have to ask Steve Donahue. I don't know if this is still going on, but that's kind of cool. Science fiction. So this anthology was published by Damon Knight back in 1972. Damon Knight, a science fiction writer and critic who had very strong ideas about what constituted a good SF book and what wasn't. And he doesn't like some science fiction writers that I like a lot. We have different opinions, me and old Damon Knight. But that's okay. He could put together a good science fiction anthology, and this is one, the science fiction Argosy. And he wrote in his introduction why he put this together. And he wrote this back in November 22nd, 1971. Some few years ago, when I was the only teenage science fiction addict in Hood River, Oregon, I prowled the stacks of the local library for books like Etidorfa by John Uri Lloyd and The Mysterious Island by Jules Verne. I ordered novels by H.G. Wells from the State Library. I sent away to England for secondhand volumes by Olaf Stapledon and Thorne Smith. Like a pornographer looking for pornography, I ferreted out science fiction in the Americans magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, the American Boy, but I never got enough. There were 3 American SF magazines and a scattering of hardcover books published over the last half-century, and that was all. Nowadays, well, you know what it's like nowadays. 20 years ago, anthologists felt they had to justify themselves when they added another SF anthology to the 50 then in existence. What am I to say now about the 500th? Apparently, Roger, this was the 500th science fiction anthology. He counted those out very carefully, I'm sure. My idea in compiling this book was simply to put together the biggest and most comprehensive collection of good science fiction that I possibly could. And so this is Damon Knight's comprehensive collection of good SF as opposed to that crappy stuff that Roger and I normally like. But there is a lot of great stuff in here and some interesting choices. And of course, we've got Isaac Asimov is in here. C.L. Moore is in here, an author I like a lot. John Wyndham is in here with Consider Her Ways. Jack Finney is in here with The Third Level. This is actually split into 2 parts. There's a part 1 and a part 2. I'm not sure why, unless this was published as 2 paperback editions, but I don't know that it ever was. Who knows? But there's a lot of good stuff in here. And then the part 1 finishes up with The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester. So the first novel that's in this. And yeah, you can't probably get a better novel from the 1950s for science fiction than The Demolished Man. That is a fantastic book, The Demolished Man. And I don't think I've ever done a video on it, but I'm sure plenty of people have. Fantastic book about a crime, and it had to be the perfect crime because it was in the future when cops had ESP and could read your mind and would know if you were going to murder somebody or not. So that was a good book. Then we've got part 2. We've got Somerset Dreams by Kate Wilhelm, who I think, wasn't she married to Damon Knight? I can't remember for sure, but I think she might have been. And we've got L. Sprague de Camp's in here with Judgment Day. Poul Anderson is in here with Journey's End. Poul Anderson usually is pretty great. This volume ends with another novel, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, which is certainly one of the most interesting science fiction novels from the 1950s. Considered, of course, a classic, just like The Demolished Man. And it's a really interesting book, which I wonder if Stan Lee ever read that, because it does have some X-Men vibes in More Than Human. It's a novel that, from what I recall, Theodore Sturgeon doesn't seem to understand exactly how evolution works. But it was an excellent book. Really interesting. And it was interesting for the 1950s because it was one of those science fiction books in the 1950s that was kind of looking ahead to the new wave, I think. The new wave of science fiction, which happened in 1965 and changed science fiction forever. Damon Knight, very interested and concerned about the literary level of science fiction. And so these stories are of high quality. Wasn't into the pulp stuff, Damon Knight, so much, which of course Roger and I enjoy. But it takes all kinds, and this is a fantastic anthology. I think this is pretty easy to get your hands on, I think. I found it, from what I remember, there was a book fair in Berkeley, and I think, from what I remember, I found it there, just kind of randomly hanging out. How it got there, who knows, from the Boston Public Library. I don't know if this was stolen or discarded. I don't think it says discarded anywhere on here. And I think they usually do. Let me take a look at the back. Oh yeah, it was withdrawn. It was withdrawn. Little pocket says so. There's Damon Knight there. Usually you see him with a gigantic beard, but he doesn't have a beard in the picture, obviously. This is an excellent book if you like science fiction. Great science fiction from the 1950s up to 1972, I guess. There's some older stories in this. There were some newer stories at the time in this. It's excellent. You should read it if you ever find it. It is ginormous, but full of good stuff. So yeah, that's the book I'm talking about today. I will shut up now, and I will probably be back tomorrow with a video about something, and my weekly, it's now the weekly reading report, will be here on Monday. Okay, guys, I will see you then.